Alright, so now it is the main event of monitors, the all-important pulse ox, the most important monitor in anesthesia, asked in all interviews to prospective anesthesia students all across the United States of America, all over the world. It's the first one on is the last one off, so know how a pulse ox works. So, a little background is important. So, signs and symptoms of hypoxia: tachycardia, tachypnea, altered mental status, and sweating. Now, why is that important? Because when they're under anesthesia, we kind of blunt their heart rate, we control their breathing. It's hard to have altered mental status when you're, gassed down and paralyzed, and it's difficult to sweat as well. So we're not going to be able to know if they're hypoxic or not, or if they're symptomatically hypoxic based on these symptoms. So hypoxia, kind of for the healthy patient, should be 95 to 100% on the pulse ox during anesthesia. Anything below 94 is considered hypoxic. And anything in general, like trending, if they're 97, they're trending down like 2-3 points. I mean, that's something we kind of, like, why is that happening? Oxygen sat less than 90 is an emergency. You need to kind of do something about it. So the pulse ox, first on, last off. It's percent of oxygen bound to hemoglobin. It's not, the arterial oxygen reading, as you're familiar with, reading blood gases in the ICU. Measures, heart rate. You can get the respiratory rate and tidal volume based off the waveform, so you get an idea of cardiac output and blood pressure and kind of fluid volume status. It can be derived from that. So readings are signal averaged over several seconds, so there is a delay on the pulse ox. If something happens, it's going to take a little bit of time for it to show up on the monitor. So a large fall in arterial oxygen will not produce a significant fall until it's 60 to 70. So that's quite a bit. It may take up to a minute to detect a hypoxic event. SpO2, mainly reflecting hemoglobin carrying oxygen, represents kind of 98% of how the tissues get it. The other 2% is dissolved in plasma. Factors that can affect the reading: the bright lights in the operating room can interfere, because this is based off, as we'll go over later, light absorption. Hypovolemia, low cardiac output, and arrhythmia. I mean, anyone has ever taken care of a sick person knows that their pulse ox is almost worthless in that situation. Vasoconstriction, carbon monoxide poisoning, methylene blue, indocyanine green, indigo carmine, so kind of indicators given at times can interfere with it, and obviously nail polish. Make sure those nails are clean so we get an accurate reading. Motion artifact, rarely be more of someone like a surgical assistant leaning on the pulse ox versus the patient moving it. So factors affecting the readings. So as we go over a little bit as far as the wavelengths of absorption of how it's read, these are, so carboxyhemoglobin absorbs at 660, which is the same wavelength as deoxyhemoglobin. So it can give you a false high of what is actually going on. Also, A1C greater than 7, so uncontrolled diabetics can give you an overestimation of reading. Methemoglobin absorbs at 660 and 940, which is exactly the wavelengths that the pulse ox was working at. So you can be cyanotic with a normal reading in that instance as well. Sulfhemoglobin absorbs at 660, so again, cyanosis with a normal. And the indicators: the methylene blue, indocyanine green, fluorescent, isosulfane blue can cause low readings because of the absorption. And then black, green, blue nail polish, if you can't get it off, you kind of have to adjust how you're mounting this. So the scientific foundation for which the pulse ox works is the Beer-Lambert law. So Beer's law: absorption of radiation given by a thickness of a solution of a given concentration is the same as that of twice the thickness of a solution. Lambert: each layer of equal thickness absorbs an equal fraction of radiation which passes through it. So pretty much, it's measuring the blood through here. It has a light emitting diode on the top, and then passing through and how much gets absorbed by the hemoglobin carrying oxygen and deoxyhemoglobin gives us the pulse ox reading. So you have a red infrared light. So skipping ahead to the pulse oximeter with the absorption wavelength diagram. So it uses red light and infrared light. So at 660 nanometers, the red light and deoxyhemoglobin is more absorbed, and the infrared light at 940 nanometers, its wavelength is where oxyhemoglobin is more absorbed. So a couple slides ago, we talked about things that can give you false readings. I mean, that is why. It's showing you absorption that isn't there. Because you see as the next slide, giving you low concentration, low absorption. It's about kind of what's between the light emitting diode, well, how much is absorbed, how much of that light is absorbed. Principles of the wavelength are kind of the same as they were for the art line. That dichrotic notch, the insensura, kind of the aortic valve closing. And different wavelengths here. So the clinical consideration. So obviously the pulse ox reaches to 100, but I mean we've all seen kind of arterial oxygen levels to 300, 400. You know, if someone gets intubated in the unit, they leave them on 100% FiO2. The residents forget about it. Hours later, you check a blood gas they never ordered, and it's 400. So anything above that 100 reading is going to read 100% on the pulse ox, which is, you know, very large range. So during the high FiO2 delivery, like induction, when you're kind of boosting up the reserves because you take their ability to breathe away before intubating them to kind of give you time just in case. PO2 100 to 500, pulse ox read 100%. Also, a patient that's been breathing 100% FiO2 may be apneic for a period of time before desaturation. So that's kind of important too, and you're going to try to extubate, make sure that they are breathing on their own. If that O2 level was well above 100 and they're not really breathing that well, you know, don't get seduced by that 100% on the pulse ox reading. Bronchial intubation could go undetected, so you put it, you know, too far, you know, right main stem them. If they're really high, then it might take a while for that pulse ox level to come down before you notice it. I mean, which could be somewhat of an issue because it could be while the surgery is starting and having to adjust where the tube is. Esophageal intubation would be recognized quickly because, I mean, there ain't no oxygen in the stomach, so that will respond very quickly. So that was the pulse ox.